Good morning and welcome to Life Point Community Church. It's great to be here with you again. I want to start off by wishing someone in our congregation a happy birthday. Nino Orlandi is 65 today. Now, I get this all the time. Who's that again? It seems like people can never remember names anymore. I'm constantly describing people instead of just saying their names. So, Nino is the tall, handsome Dutch guy with the lovely, tall, blonde Dutch wife, with the 4 tall, beautiful children who usually sit at the top of the theater on Sundays, as if they need to be any taller. So happy 65th birthday, Nino. May God bless you on this day as you celebrate who you are and who you were created to be. We're glad as a church to be celebrating with you today. Well, friends, we are starting a grief support group in 2 weeks. It will happen on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. via Zoom. And I've been saying for the past 2 months that COVID-19 is affecting many people. Can you just imagine those who have experienced a loss of a loved one on top of what we're going through? It's tough and it's very hard. So we want to be there for those who need support during this time. So if you've lost a loved one, whether that's recently or it may have been a few years, but you're still facing new challenges, well, I invite you to join us for an 8-week session starting Tuesday, June 9th at 7 p.m. Sign-up details and registration has been sent out via email and is on our website. These are free sessions, so please pass on to anyone who needs this at this time. Leslie's recovering from surgery, and you may have read that Linda's stepdaughter passed away earlier this week. Please keep Linda and her family in your prayers, as well as Leslie as she recovers from surgery. The song The Blessing has been a popular one throughout this pandemic. I'm sure you've seen it on social media. So I wanted to leave you with the words as we continue our service this morning. Now, this is from the Old Testament in the book of Numbers, and this first part is known as a priestly blessing. Moses told Aaron to bless the Israelites with these words. It goes like this: "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace." Now, this was when the Israelites were in the wilderness. It was on their journey from Egypt to the promised land. But this wilderness was hard. They experienced so many challenges and hardships, and it was difficult for them to fully devote themselves to God. They were scared, they were fearful, they were anxious, and they had lost hope. I feel like we're in the wilderness at the moment, and some of you may be finding it hard to live the Christian life. The challenges are too great. Your anxiety is taking over your mind and body. Or perhaps you're feeling like the Israelites and doubting God is really going to get you through this period of your life and into the promised land. Whatever stage you're in, whatever you're going through, may you be blessed through these words today and always. Amen.
Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, and be gracious to you. Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, and be gracious to you. Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. 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 May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children and their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and the children and the children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you. He is with you in the morning, in the evening, and you're coming and you're going and you're weeping and rejoicing. He is for you. 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 He is for you and your children and your children. He is for you. He is for you. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. Oh man. In the morning, in the evening, you're coming and you're going and you're weeping and rejoicing. He is for you. He is for you. May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children. He is for you.
So I thought that today we'd have a wee look at the words of Psalm 124, which is all about how you feel when you realise you've been lucky. It's all about how you feel when you've gone through something and you realise, it could have been so much worse. So the spirituality that we're going to engage with today is basically the spirituality of feeling relieved. Okay, here we go. So the first thing we read is that this is a song of ascents. So this is a phrase that crops up every now and again in the book of Psalms, and it's what it basically means is that what we're about to read came from the temple in Jerusalem. It was definitely a piece of worship that was written at the temple, and it was used as part of the core liturgy in the temple, which is important to us this morning because it means that what we're about to read about feeling relieved, about feeling glad that we got through it, about feeling glad that, the worst didn't happen, that actually was one of the ways that people expressed their spirituality in the temple in Jerusalem. It's also important to note that this particular Song of Ascents was written by David, or at least is attributed to David. David probably didn't write it. This is just to say that this is the kind of sentiment that David could have related to and agreed with. So when you read through the story of the Bible, David is one of the good guys. No question about this. David was a good, solid, genuine human being. Definitely a legitimate follower of God. But he went through his fair share of hard times, really hard times, and he made his fair share of stupid mistakes. And so here before us is a piece of worship that is especially for people like you. So here you are this morning, and you're a good person. No doubt about that. You are a good, genuine person doing your best to be the best that you can. No doubt about it. And yet, you've gone through your fair share of hard times. Things aren't easy for you. And like everyone else, you've made your fair share of mistakes. And so maybe once a year, worshippers would make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And as part of their pilgrimage, they'd always have this moment where they would pause and feel relief. So they'd think back over the last year that they'd just lived. They'd reflect on some of the difficult times that they'd gone through, some of the mistakes that they'd made, and they'd say with gratitude, well, that was bad, but it could have been so much worse. Then he says, it would have been worse if the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say. If the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us. Okay, so the phrase that's used twice in that sentence is for me one of the most surprising and comforting things that the Bible says, namely, that God's on our side, which, given the context of hard times and stupid mistakes, is kind of surprising. When we go through hard times in life, we don't feel particularly blessed. When we make stupid mistakes, we don't feel particularly close to God. We don't feel all that spiritual. And yet in the Bible, there is this constant theme that God is committed to you, and that nothing that is done to you or by you can change that fundamental commitment. So at this point, the writer of the psalm wants you to get it into your head that God isn't mad at you and he isn't ignoring you. He's on your side. He's in your corner, rooting for you. Okay? More. He says they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us, the torrent would have swept over us, the raging waters would have swept us away. All right, so what's happening here is that the writer is looking back at what he's just come through, and he's saying, that could have been a lot worse. And if it wasn't for God, it would have been a lot worse. because the things that were against me, notice how he describes them, they had this huge appetite and they wanted to swallow. They wanted to swallow. This is a word that in Hebrew means they were just hungry for more and more and more and more. And I thought about that word a lot this week. I read an article about a mega wealthy landlord downtown Toronto who's refusing to give his tenants a break on their commercial rent. So this landlord, he owns a whole bunch of commercial property, and all of his tenants have been closed for the last 10 weeks now, and they just can't, they're just not making it. And help is available. There's that government scheme that pays 50% of the rent, and then the tenant pays 25% of the rent. So all the landlord has to do is take a 25% loss on his commercial rent. But he's refusing to do it because he wants all. And that's the world we're living in now. A world of hungry hippos where we want more and more and more and more and more. And I'm not a communist, that's for sure, you know that. But there's something about our world today that is all about the relentless and thoughtless consumption and pursuit of more and more and more and more. And I guess that works for you if you're the one getting the more and more. I guess it's okay for you if you're the one doing the consuming. But when you get consumed, suddenly it doesn't feel like fun, right? When your job gets sent off to another part of the world so someone can do your job cheaper, so someone at the top of the food chain can earn even more money, you got swallowed. That's what happened to you. When some guy at the top of your company, downsized you so he could make an extra 100,000 on his bonus at the end of the year, you got swallowed. And one way or another, the world has, I think, always been this way. Sometimes ordinary people like you get swallowed so someone else can have more that they don't really need. He also in this verse talks about a torrent and a flood. So in Israel they have these things called wadis. They're basically steep channels that have been cut into the desert by water coming down off mountains. And so what happens is it rains in the mountains like 40 miles away, and all of this water finds its way into these narrow channels, and you get this flash flood, this tidal wave actually pushing its way down through the desert wadi. And for that reason it was and still is today very dangerous to hang out in these wadis. They feel safe, they feel cool, they're good places to shelter from the heat of the desert sun, but without warning, you can get a flash flood coming off a mountain 40 miles away, just barreling down these wadis, and from out of nowhere you can get drowned. And again, obviously when I read this word on Monday morning, I couldn't help but think about the situation that we're all in right now. Hard times can come on you unexpectedly. You can be tracking along just fine in life. It's 2018, things are going well. 2019, great year for the economy. If you had any money invested in the market, you probably made 14-18%, fantastic year. And 1st of January, as far as you're concerned, 2020 was going to be awesome. You were going to grow this, you were going to make that, you were going to save this, you were going to visit these places, you had all these things you wanted to do, and boom, from out of nowhere, suddenly you're engulfed by something completely out with your control. And remember, all of this is worship. All of this comes from the core liturgy in the Jewish temple that they were particularly keen to give pilgrims. In other words, when they were planning this, they said, if someone only comes to the temple once a year, this is part of the spirituality they've got to understand. They've got to understand that in worship, it's okay to say life is hard and mistakes happen. And if it wasn't for God, it would have been so much worse. So he says, praise to the Lord who has not let us be torn by their teeth. Dangerous world. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped. Now, again, just to be clear, in order for you to escape from a snare, you have to be where? Exactly. You have to have been caught up in the snare in the first place. So this is super honest spirituality. I found myself in a dodgy situation and it was dangerous. And to be honest, it almost got the better of me. It was touch and go, but we escaped because God gave us help, the maker of heaven and earth. I think that's a beautiful piece of worship. Life was difficult, it was touch and go, and it could have been worse, but God got us through. I like that. So, excuse me a moment. So for me, this song of ascents is, it's good news about bad news, isn't it? And of course, as a Christian, these Old Testament words remind me of that great passage in the book of Romans where the Apostle Paul says this. He says to the church who are struggling, the church who are going through really difficult times, he says to them, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him. A beautiful sentence. In what things? All things. And included in the word all are things we don't like. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. Now, when this New Testament verse says that God is working for the good in all things, he is not saying that all things are good. Nor is he saying that we should talk about bad things as though they were good things. So he's not saying that we should indulge in the sort of verbal gymnastics that we might learn at a positive thinking seminar. I think that if your marriage is awful, it's awful. I think that when you lose your job, then you've lost your job. I think that when your health fails and you've got a life-threatening disease, you don't have health challenges, you've got a life-threatening disease. And that's that, all right? That's just the way it is. There's no point in putting positive spin on bad events. So he's not in this verse talking about the bad things of life as though they were anything other than bad things. What he is saying is that, look, I know bad things are happening to you right now. I know you're really going through stuff right now. But in all that stuff, I just need you to know that God is working. And what's fascinating about this is that the word he uses for working isn't the normal Greek word for working. The normal word for working is the Greek word ergon, which simply means to expend energy. However, here Paul uses a completely different word called synergeo, which is the word we get our word synergy from. And it basically means two completely different elements working together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. So when he says that God is synergeo in the all things of your life, what he is saying is that in the various elements of your life, some of which are undoubtedly bad, undoubtedly negative, God, through those elements, however poisonous they may be, is bringing about a result that is greater than the sum of those individual negative, disappointing elements. So take common table salt as an obvious example. So in high school, you learned that salt is a compound. You learned that it is a compound of sodium and chloride. Now, sodium and chloride individually are rather nasty elements. You wouldn't, for a moment, sprinkle sodium on your chips, right? Or fries, I should say. You wouldn't sprinkle sodium on your fries. That would be a very dangerous thing to do, especially if there was any moisture on them. Nor would you think about dousing your fries in pure chlorine. That would be equally dumb. But when sodium and chloride are brought together and they combine to make the rather tasty commodity called salt that is completely different to the sum of their parts. This is the meaning of the word working that Paul uses in this sentence. He's saying, I just want you to know that in the various nasty poisons of your life, in the wasted years, in the worried nights, in the depressing futility of that nursing home, God is working. He is working in all the various parts of your life to create something entirely different from the sum of those parts. Something that, of course, is good. In all things, God works for the good of those who love him. And for me, that, of course, immediately raises the question, what is the good to which this sentence refers? And as soon as we ask the question, we might immediately offer an answer. After all, it's not rocket science. If your marriage is awful, good would be your marriage becoming more loving, more intimate, more supportive. If you've just lost your job, good would be getting another job. Good would be getting an even better job. If you have a life-threatening condition, good would be a complete cure. When we think about what would be good for us, we predictably think about the absence of pain and the presence of pleasure and comfort, and rightly so. That's just our evolutionary instincts kicking in. We know that when life takes a turn for the worst, as it often does, we're in danger, and that it is by definition good to get out of the danger. That, however, is not what Paul means in this sentence when he talks about our good. And I think we might be glad that that's not what he means. After all, sometimes with the best will in the world, we don't get out of the danger that we're in. Sometimes life takes a turn for the worst, and it's, I'm sorry, but it's not always temporary. Sometimes awful relationships just stay awful. Sometimes, your career takes a downward slide, and it never gets better. Sometimes you get some health condition and there's no way out of it. That's just life. It's not just life for you, it's life for everyone eventually. So I'm glad that Paul is not talking about our temporary good, but our eventual good. He's talking about you at the end of your day, at the final picture. And he's saying that when the story is over, when life has done its worst, and you have eventually breathed your last, and you open your eyes in a new world, and you take your first glimpse at heaven, in that moment, you will realize the good that God was working in all the things of your life. And it will be so worth it. Then at the end, I'll fast forward to the end of Romans 8. I think it's so amazing. He says something important. He says, it's super encouraging actually. He says, Christ Jesus who died. This is this is the creed of early Christianity. It's a statement of history and of theology. It is to say that Jesus died, and he died for me, and he died for you. But the creed left there is incomplete. And so he goes on and he says, look, he says more than that. He was raised to life. And then look at what he says. Look at what he says. He says right now, Jesus is at the right hand of God, interceding, speaking up for, speaking on behalf of us. So right now, Paul is telling the church that not only did Jesus die on their behalf, he also speaks on their behalf. The Bible asks us to accept that at this very moment in time, Jesus is in heaven speaking for you. And I think that's good to know. Because when you're going through a hard time, or when you've done something stupid, sometimes it feels that no one is on your side. Sometimes it feels like nobody understands, that nobody gets you. And yet in the Bible we learn that generally God is for us. And in the New Testament we learn specifically that Jesus speaks up for us. And where we feel rightly bad about some of the stupid stuff that we've done, in that moment of our badness, Jesus is able to say in heaven, I died for that. That's covered. I died for that. I died for that. I died for that. I paid the price for that. There is no episode in your life that so low or so ugly that Jesus cannot say, I died for that. I paid for that. I am for you. So therefore, he concludes, who shall separate us from the love of God? Who? Shall trouble? And the word trouble there is such a perfect word. It means to be in a tight spot. That's basically the meaning of the Greek word. It means to be in a tight, confined space. And so many things in life can leave you in a tight spot. And yet here the question is, shall any of life's tight spots separate you from the God who loves you? No. Shall hardship, shall persecution, shall nakedness or danger or sword? Paul would say that the troubles of life don't call into question the legitimacy of either God's goodness or our faith. Indeed, the contrary. Paul would say that sometimes the difficult things we go through, those are just the lot of those who try to do right in this world. Then he concludes. He says, in all these things, all the trouble, all the disappointment, all the difficulty, and everything, he says, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Now, the word conquer in this sentence is written in the present tense. So he's not saying here that when life gets bad, we hope to conquer. We strive to get through things. He's saying something bigger than that. He's saying that whatever episode of your life might be described by all these things: trouble, hardship, difficulty, regret, pain, disappointment. You just need to know that in that episode, God has not forgotten that he's got plans for you that are good and perfect and pleasing. And he will see those plans through to the very end. So this isn't saying, come on, try harder, pull your socks up and get through this. Not that there's anything wrong with that. This is saying that Jesus has got a hold of you and he won't let go. And so he says, I'm convinced that neither life nor death, nor angels, nor demons, nor the present, nor the future, nor nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. So, I'm sorry to be so real about this, but the spirituality of the Bible is real. So we need to acknowledge that the Christian faith isn't an escape from the pains of life. I wish it were, but it just isn't. The grace of God is not an anesthetic from the ups and downs of living in this world. Rather, the grace of God that we have steers into the difficulties, into the disappointments, into the darknesses, and says that none of those things, none of them, are any match for the never-ending love that God has for you. A love that will never let you go, a love that will never turn its back on you, a love that is holding you tight, and a love that won't change its mind. So let me say God bless you, and let me leave you with a promise of Jesus. Jesus promised that in this world you will have trouble, but be of good heart, for I have overcome the world. You're not alone. You're never alone. God is with you. He is on your side, speaking up for you, making it all work together. One day, either in this life or the next, it will make sense. Thank you for listening. God bless you. See you next week. Hopefully soon we can get together like we used to, but in the meantime, chin up, keep pressing on. God bless.